We live in a world where there is enough. There's enough land, there's enough food, there's enough water, but we have so much greed and avarice, and which is redundant, and I believe a lack of humanity, which is how we started our day today, talking about the killing of Mr. Neely. I don't know why people don't want everyone to eat. I don't know why someone next to you getting something takes something from you. But this is where we are. So I'm really excited to talk with this guy. He is an author, of course, and a universal basic income advocate, author of Let There Be Money. Let me welcome to the show, Scott Santens. Hello.
Hi, Karen. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks for coming in. You write in the introduction, in the beginning, man said, let there be money, and there was. Centuries later, March 27th, 2020, the United States passed into law the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. And with the stroke of a pen, over $2 trillion was spent without first taxing or borrowing from anyone. Make that make sense. Yeah, I was talking with Ida Henrys, who's going to, be here more frequently, helping people navigate this space. And she said that there was the greatest exchange of wealth during this period of time. More people got more money than ever in the history of time. And a lot of folk got left out and left behind. The rich got richer. Those who knew, they got it. And others did not. Talk about why you started there with the $2 trillion exchange.
Yeah. It all comes down to money and thinking about money and the way we think about money. And I think there's just a lot of confusion about even what money is, and the way people talk about it as it being like this real thing that you have to have money in order to spend money. And it's all about like money itself, instead of really thinking about what is money. Like it's a tool. I like to think of it too as like talking about inches or something. And so we think of like, we don't ask, do we have enough inches to build a house? Like the question is, do you have enough wood and the workers and the metal and the resources, like all that stuff that need for a house? You don't say, do we have enough inches? But when it comes to money, we're always talking about, do we have enough money for this? Do we have enough money for that? Instead of asking, can we actually do these things? Like, is there enough food? Is there enough resources for housing? And that's the big question. So when it came to the coronavirus and like our response to it, we just did it. We just spent the money because that's what the government can do. The government creates money, and every time it spends money, it's creating it into existence. And that's what we did. And then as far as taxes go, taxes don't make spending possible. It just pulls money out of the economy so that more spending is possible without inflation. And it's like, that's the trick, is that people think that you have to have money first, the government taxes first and then spends, but really it's that the government spends and then taxes the money out. And that kind of, that lack of understanding of how money works, I think is kind of central to a lot of like the blocks that we have as to what we can actually accomplish that we aren't.
Well, what's your background? I'm sorry. I just want to know, like, how did you arrive at this? Did you, you go to school and it's like economics and, because I remember taking a few economics classes and my eyes glazed over and I was like, I don't know how this relates to me at all. This sucks. And I didn't do very well in those classes, but I'm great in business.
I'm sure.
Yeah, no, but I'm really good at managing, the ins and outs now, like it's, so clearly I think they want to keep us confused.
Yeah, that's I feel it's certainly part of it, and it's even not so much like a they as in like a some kind of purposeful thing. I think it's just that we've done this for so long that it's just how it is. You're born into this world and you have to accumulate money in order to spend it to live, and we all just think that's normal. And it's just how things are, and it's really hard for people to think about how different things can be. And if the way things are is like the just way of being, and we have to like break through that. How I actually got into this was actually back in 2013 through the automation argument. And this was like back before anyone was really talking about the impact of artificial intelligence and robots on like work. And I got into this as in thinking about what is going to happen when it comes to a more automated world. And the solution that I found was this idea of an unconditional universal basic income. And that was new to me. and it was really interesting. And I studied the history of it, and the various pilots that already existed, the pilots are even ongoing, and the philosophy behind it, the reasoning, the justifications. And then I also got into even, the details of the current existing safety net. And learning all of that was just new, and I realized that basic income isn't just like this potential possibility for like the future of work, but it's really something that should have existed decades, if not centuries ago at our founding, when even Thomas Paine was talking about a version of it.
It feels like, because I'm running in my head the arguments that I could hear against universal basic income. This is America and we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And it feels like that sort of flies in the face of that kind of mentality. And so when you talk about unlocking what's, that mentality and how do we get there? That's the big question in my mind. How do you get, like Karen said, how is it that not everybody can be okay? Some people are working as hard as other people, but just without as much access, or they didn't have the leg up that you had, or what have you. So how do we get there?
Yeah, I think one of the stumbling blocks for us is what's known as the just world hypothesis, which is that good things happen to good people for making good decisions, and bad things happen to bad people for making bad decisions. And so you look at someone in poverty and you're like, well, look at them. They deserve that. They're lazy. They made bad mistakes. Like, look where I am. Like, everything's going great for me. So I'm making good decisions and I'm a good person. And all it takes, of course, is something to happen and everything can change for someone. And then at that point, they're like, oh, well, I'm different. Like, this wasn't my choice. This happened to me, and that's just bad luck. So it's always different the way we look at our own circumstances and our own decisions versus other people's. And so I think that that's part of it. And there's a certain defense mechanism to it. Like, if everything's going great and other people are not doing great, then it's because of your own decisions, and you'll just keep making good decisions. You don't have to worry about those bad things happening because you aren't going to make bad decisions. So as long as you blame people for whatever circumstances they're in, then it makes you feel like more secure and safer in your own circumstances.
That's just back to the frailty of human beings. Instead of working on ourselves, it's so easy. It's much easier to point a finger. But there's a scripture about that. Don't remove the splinter from someone's eyes when you're walking around with a giant tree log. We're talking with Scott Santens. The book is Let There Be Money. And you're breaking down what is money. It's an exchange. Before in Africa, it was cowrie shells. Then it was, the exchange was gold. When gold became too heavy, they did the fiat of paper money, but it was backed by gold. So that the gold was somewhere, but this paper gave you a tender and it allowed you to say, I know this is backed. And then in the 70s, we don't need to be backing it. We have nuclear weapons. So we don't have to back nothing. We just gonna print the money. I'm paraphrasing what actually happened, but here we are now printing $2 trillion during coronavirus. And again, the exchange of wealth, the wealthy people got so much more. The folk at the top got so much more wealthy during the pandemic, and now they have the audacity to lay people off. Make that make sense, Scott. Make that make sense.
Yeah, the way that we responded to the pandemic was, I would say, was better than the way they responded back in the real estate crisis and the Great Recession that followed. We actually made sure that people got money this time, and that was distributed widely instead of only going to the top in the form of like quantitative easing. But this time we did both. And so quantitative easing is something that's great for the rich. I mean, that helps the stock markets expand, and people were able to convert that even to buying up more housing, and their stocks just flew up, and that generated a lot of wealth. It's unfortunate that that they let QE go on for so long. I think that only exacerbated inequality. And I think it's also unfortunate that we, even though we did the right thing with stimulus payments, and even 6 months of the child tax credit, which is also an amazing policy, still people now, because it was in a pandemic, because we're seeing inflation now, people look at this and go, oh, well, that caused inflation. and people just blame it. And there's so much partisanship and polarization into this too, where, you just look at this from a, does this help my guy? Does this help my team? Or does it help their team kind of argument? And so it's in the interests of, one side to blame the other side for this, and the other side to say, no, 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 it's, you did this and your decisions that you made. So it's even more messed up with how hyper polarized everything is. It's so much more difficult to have like a really complex, nuanced conversation about what did cause the inflation that we're seeing. How do we avoid it in the future? Because it's all just like, no, let's play the blame game.
Because that's easier to fit in 140 characters on a tweet,
Yeah.
or 280 or whatever it is. So a couple of weeks ago on this show, Karen interviewed a woman named Jasmine Crow, and she was doing these amazing things by feeding people who were, houseless, and were kind of down on their luck and whatever. And she started this as one person. And one of the things that she said that stuck with me was she was saying, it's really not about scarcity. It's that there is enough food, there is enough, that it was really about logistics. Is there an argument that could be made for that with regard to like universal basic income? I mean, there is enough, right? Is there enough for us to all be at a level where we're not struggling? We're not going to the emergency room when we're super, super sick. We are able to afford healthcare. Is there enough for us?
Yeah. It's not that there's a scarcity of resources, that there's a scarcity of kindness and will, political will, especially. We have plenty. One way to look at this is, if you go back to the 1970s, this is where productivity decoupled from wages. And so prior to the 1970s, productivity rose with wages. And then in the 70s, that split, productivity kept rising, and then wages stagnated all the way till now, for the most part. And there was a calculation done to see, what if inequality had not grown, if productivity had continued rising with wages, what would that look like? And so the difference is that $50 trillion would have actually flowed to the bottom 90% instead of mostly to the top 1%. And everyone now would be earning about an extra $1,300 per month from productivity. And so we have enough. And if we had started a UBI back then, and it would have been very small, and it would have just grown to, $1,300 a month now. And that's how, I think that's a good sign of saying, well, of course we have enough, because, we actually, productivity is continuing to grow, and it's only going to continue to grow. And we're just not spreading it around. It's just concentrating more and more at the top. And it's crazy to actually look just how much is concentrating at the top, like even breaking out the top 1% of the 1% of the 1% compared to everybody else. It's massive inequality. And we have plenty of food. We have especially plenty of food. We waste about 40% of our food supply. And yet, there's plenty of food in stores, and there's people going to food banks and trying to get food that can afford it. During the pandemic, we did the wise thing of saying, let's make sure people have some money to go to the store and buy food. And because we saw massive lines of cars that are miles long to get food, even though we had plenty of food. So obviously there's enough. It's that our distribution system is broken down, and our distribution mechanism is employment. And there's just not enough money flowing to people through the employment mechanism. And that's why I think UBI is so important, not only for poverty alleviation, but also for it to address the massive inequality, to make sure that the middle class also increases their incomes and also their security, because it's not only about lack of resources, but a lack of security, of feeling that everything's going to be okay. And there's big impacts from people feeling stressed out all the time and worried about everything. And that feeds into, it feeds into health, it feeds into crime, it feeds into even our political polarization.